Thank you, Angelica. And just to kind of supplement the confusion on the books and things, our previous book was Pilgrimage to the Museum, which Angelica mentioned. This is a new publication, just fresh out this year, called Visions of the Divine. And those of you who have read Pilgrimage to the Museum know it's about man's search for God over 5,000 years through all of art. And what Evelyn and I sort of saw was that the times when man comes closest to finding God in art is in sacred art, actually. So the idea of visions was that, for hundreds of years, the church used sacred art to help the clergy and the laity to enter into the mystery of the Eucharist. Most art historians and even theologians today like to say it was because the people were illiterate. And so it was a way of educating them. And that is true. It was a way of catechizing the faithful. But frankly, you could use cartoons to catechize the faithful. This is not cartoons. This stuff touches the soul. And there's a wonderful cross-section of my crazy life. If you Google Steve Auth with Maria Bartiromo, you'll find various things, because I'm on her show every month. But I was on her show the morning after Notre Dame burned down. And Maria called me up early in the morning and said, Steve, I know you're on at 7, but you get here at 6. I want to lead off the show on the cathedral. I know you're very Catholic. I want to talk about that. So we start off talking about the markets and the usual stuff. And then we start getting into the cathedral. And I say to her, Maria, you don't understand. It's not about the mortar cracking and the flying buttresses and all the things that the archaeologists have been talking about all night. The reason those were there was to allow the architects in the 1300s to build these walls of shimmering glass. Because the reason we needed the walls of shimmering glass is because for Catholics, this is heaven on earth when we enter Notre Dame and we participate in the Eucharist. For us, this is like watching heaven burn. And, that's an element here of what happens in Visions of the Divine. So what happens is, in the history of the world, around 1517 to be precise, there's a Reformation. And when the Protestant church splits off, a lot of the art from the churches is either destroyed or ripped out and sent to museums. And so today, much of the art is in museums. And what happened is the theologians took over explaining the Mass. They write these wonderful books to each other, and but the laity don't read them. And the art historians explain the art, but they don't want to mention God, and they write these great articles to each other, which again, that goes right over the laity's head. So what Visions does is a pilgrimage around the world to find the art of the Mass. We visit 20 different cities, and we recurate it inside the Mass. And it links the Mass with the art. And it helps, prayer by prayer, helps the laity and the clergy re-enter into the Mass through visuals, through this sacred art. That's kind of what we're doing. So that's a long-winded explanation. And by the way, I'm not the missionary of Wall Street. I know that was the title of the book that Sophia put on the book. But I'm a missionary on Wall Street. So just to be clear about that. Okay, so, a lot of folks have asked me, how did you come up with this idea? Because it is, to me, almost remarkable that no one has ever done this before. I mean, it seems like kind of obvious in ways, but I always think the Lord is inspiring all of us to do stuff for him, but we normally just ignore it or we're not ready to hear it. And so in the prologues of my books, you'll always see, it won't be written this way, but I'm just telling you, since this is kind of a book signing, my prologues are an attempt to help answer the question, how did this come about? And there's usually different little anecdotes and stories that occur that kind of got me to do this. But in some ways, this book, Vision, started 50 years ago. And I was in an art history class at Princeton, and one of the most famous Baroque art historians in the world at the time teaching that course, Dr. Martin, and he's taking us through, they trained us how to read paintings to know exactly what year it was painted. Okay, so this is a late Rembrandt, not quite late, but call it mature Rembrandt. And in particular, what's really interesting about this painting is Rembrandt finally, at this point in his career, developed the ability to paint light from within, as opposed to from without. You think of Caravaggio, like we have on the back wall here, the light is shining down, right? Rembrandt starts to figure out how to have the light come from inside the figures. So artistically, this is technically an incredible piece of art. It's at the Louvre. And I've been struggling with this painting for 50 years because there was something mysterious about it beyond this light coming from within that I wasn't spiritually ready to figure out. But as my own life journey went on and, I became an agnostic and then was a revert to the faith in a kind of very dramatic fashion. Some of you know that story. I started to see the art differently and began to understand what this was really about. This painting, The Supper at Emmaus, is, it's about the first Mass, actually. Right? If you think about it, the two discouraged disciples, Cleopas and the unnamed second, Luke never names the second, I think to allow us to put ourselves into the scene. And their best friend, the guy who they thought was going to be the Messiah, has just been brutally tortured and killed in front of the whole country. And now he's dead. And they're retreating. They're heading out of Jerusalem, running away, giving up. And Jesus pursues them, the resurrected Jesus. It's Easter Sunday. And he pursues them. And he starts describing to them how the scriptures, as they called them in those days, presaged everything that would happen in his passion and death, i.e. what we call the gospel. So this is the liturgy of the word. He's using, in the Catholic Mass today, we have the Old Testament and the New Testament, they're always linked, one linked to the other, right? Their hearts are burning within them when they get to Emmaus. And they don't know exactly why, but they ask him to stay. They still don't recognize him. And so typically in Emmaus paintings at this time, painters paint the moment of recognition, which is, as Jesus says the words of institution, which is the words of institution today in the Eucharist, same words are used. Do this in memory of me. He breaks the bread, says the blessing, says the words. They recognize him. And up to this point, even an earlier version that Rembrandt himself had painted 20 years earlier when he was younger, that moment of recognition is always extremely dramatic. Light is shining, the disciples are throwing their hands in the air, fireworks are going off. Hard to miss it. But I think what Rembrandt's reflecting on is not entirely realistic. So he imagines a slightly more intimate scene here where these two apostles are alone with him. There's a waiter there, the innkeeper, and he has just broken the bread and said the blessing. And can you see their gradual realization that he's with them? Do you see it? The Cleopas, can you see him gripping the napkin and gripping his chair? So he's just like, is this possible? It's Jesus. And his friend almost can't believe it. He's gasping and he's putting his hand in front of his mouth. And this is the way Rembrandt imagines this moment. And to me, I think it's very modern almost. And I realize now it's why I was drawn to this painting. But in some ways, for 50 years, the Lord has been pinging me to do this book, I think. And, well, you know what happens next. They become evangelists. They run back to Jerusalem. It's 5 miles to Emmaus. They walked all afternoon. And then Luke, the early Christian community, uses this story of Emmaus to structure the Mass. That becomes the Mass. So that's the prologue in a way. And the reason that we call this not Visions of the Divine, this presentation, but I call it 12 Paths to the Heart of the Mystery, is in my early talks on the book, I mean, we've been talking now for about 6 months about visions. I tried to cover all, I mean, there's actually 110 images in the book, but there's really kind of 80. There's a bunch of angels. If you count all of them, okay. I know we're on tape, and Charlie, the president of Sophia, might be listening. But there's really just 80 images, but still. So, I tried to cover all. It's just impossible because the Mass is so complicated. So I'm just giving you a taste of the book here tonight, okay? That's kind of what we're doing. All right, so we come to, there's a chapter, part 1 of the book is on introductory rites. So we're in the early part of the Mass here. And, we have the blessing and all that. And then the very first thing we do is the Confiteor, which, by the way, is misspelled on this slide, but forgive me for that. So what's the Confiteor all about? It's about approaching God in a humble fashion, right? As we prepare to enter the Eucharist, I mean, we're going to be communing with God himself here, both through the Word and through the Eucharist. So to do so, we have to be in a state that can accept and receive him. And particularly, we got to make sure we're in a state of grace. So we got to kind of clear up things if they're out there, and we do that through the sacrament of confession. But we always do it as a community in the Confiteor. That's the purpose of it. So, the great confessee, if you will, of the Catholic Church in Catholic imagery is Mary Magdalene. She's the woman from whom 7 demons were drawn, and she becomes really, in a way, the first evangelist because she's the first one that declares the Lord is alive on Easter Sunday. And I wanted to use Mary Magdalene for this. And, there's so many great images of her. But I thought for this moment in the Mass, we should use this late and somewhat haunting and gripping image. How many folks have seen this image that have been to Florence, right? And this is late Donatello. So Donatello is an early Renaissance sculptor. Really, some people think invented the Renaissance in some ways, along with Masaccio, who we'll show in a minute. But Donatello is painting for sculpting realistic images, right? And late in his life, he sculpts this image of Mary Magdalene. And he's referencing here, I think, the two sides of Mary. One is she's coming out of the desert here. At that time, there was a tradition that Mary went into the desert for a long period of time to do penance. That's just a tradition. It's not anything the church has ever stated is correct, but that's what's in his mind as he sculpts this. And Mary, he's kind of depicting in her, I think, the ravages of sin on our souls in some ways, right? God has created us as perfect images, but sin corrupts those images. And Mary's in rags, and she's thin and gaunt. But at the same time, can you see that Donatello has imagined her still strong? You see the sinews in her muscles, and she's thin but strong, and she's humble before God, but somehow also she's confident that he still loves her. And I think this is such an important moment for us at this moment where we're going through the Confiteor. And some people say the Catholics are always dragging themselves through the mud, and all this stuff. But it's really the idea that the Lord is trying to make us what he created us to be. And to do so, we have to be humble before him. And Mary approaches him in that way and stands strong, confident that he still loves her. This image was really the pair of Michelangelo's David, which actually also appears in visions later. We're not going to do it tonight, but I think all of you know that sculptor. And in Florence, back in the 1600s, these two images were like the two favorite statues in Florence, which is kind of interesting. David, confident in victory because he's got God with him, and Mary, confident in his love. This statue stood in the baptistry in Florence. If you've been to Florence, you know that there's like this baptistry right across from the cathedral. A lot of modern Catholics don't understand what that was for. And basically, it was used to baptize the faithful. So all new entrants to the church, they weren't in the church until they were baptized. They got baptized in a baptistry and then would walk across the square into the church. So this was there at the entrance. It was moved after the big flood in 1966. So it's in the museum now if you go to Florence. By the way, I think this is a wonderful prayer guide to the Mass itself. Some people take it to Mass with them. But it also is a wonderful guidebook because there's an appendix at the back, Appendix B, that I highly recommend. And it reorganizes the whole book by city. So if you go on a trip to Paris or Rome or Florence or Madrid or London or any of these places, you can cross-reference all the art from visions and use it as a kind of way to enter into Florence in a different way than you'll get when you go there and have a normal guide take you around. So some people are using it for that purposes. So then the next part, of course, is the liturgy of the word. And we have a chapter as we enter into the liturgy of the word called Listening to God, because Evelyn and I, and by the way, Evelyn is not here tonight. How many here know Evelyn? Okay, thank you. So she's my co-author, and really a lot of thinking about this comes with us working together. I mean, we went on this pilgrimage together, but she's really worn out tonight, so she asked me to carry on. But anyway, we wanted to have a section to help us. Again, this is where, why did the Lord ask Steve Auth to do this? I don't know. It doesn't make any sense in some ways. Most of you are probably thinking the same thing. But one is I did have some training in art history. And then two, I kind of revert and devout Catholic. But three, I'm a broken vessel. And I think that's actually important because I've committed every sin that you can imagine in going to church and attending a Mass. And so that's what it's about. It's like the visuals, how I help me understand the Mass better. And one thing I have a tendency to do is I tune out, during the liturgy of the word. I get distracted or I have trouble focusing in. So I wanted to write a chapter on just how to approach this. Because this is like the Word of God. This is not, reading from a novel. And so we have some images that you can use as visuals as the liturgy of the word starts. And one of my favorites is this one, which is why we're using it tonight, by Guido Reni, who painted in the 1600s in Italy. And it's a famous image within the Catholic Church. There's a lot of images of St. Matthew and the angel. He writes the Gospel of Matthew, and there were a lot of images in these days of an angel inspiring Matthew. And so this is one of many that we could have picked. But I just love this one because, and this hangs... most people have been to the Vatican museums, but most people don't go to the Pinacoteca because they're too, they're kind of pulled into the Sistine and all that. But if you go downstairs to the Pinacoteca, you'll find this Guido Reni. So anyway, Matthew is an old man now, and his hair is kind of gone white. I keep telling Evelyn my hair's blonde, but you know, I just love he's old, but isn't he? Doesn't he look youthful in a way, vibrant? He's inspired, and this angel of the Lord has sidled up to him so intimately, kind of, you know, right up to his elbows. And he is focused like a laser beam on what the angel is saying. And they're engaged in a conversation, which is what listening actively means. You know, it's kind of back and forth. And he's taking notes. I tell people, take notes, you know. So I think this is the attitude you want to kind of adopt as you enter the liturgy of the word. And that brings us, okay, so when we got to this part of the book, I used to, and Kat's a neighbor of ours down in New Jersey, and probably knows, maybe not realize what was going on, but it was the summer of 24, I guess I was heavily involved in writing, and this book, and I got in, and we would go out, Evelyn and I would go for long walks at night to process the day's work, you know, and we got to the liturgy where I said, sweetie, I feel like I'm in a swamp here. I mean, how do you do this? Do you do one reading? That'd be like recommitting the sin, the missionary of Wall Street. I mean, which one, you know? It's not that easy. But do you do them all? Well, we'll need an encyclopedia. So we decided what we would do was kind of think of types of stories that you get in the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Gospels, and give you visuals and reflections on those story types that you can then bring to other similar stories. So as an example, in the Old Testament, think about it as it's really salvation history, right? It's the rise and fall. God makes a covenant with us, we agree, then we fall down, and things don't go so well, and he makes another covenant, he keeps working it until he brings Jesus in to save the day, kind of thing, right? So the Old Testament is covenant history. So we have 3 or 4 stories of covenant history. The New Testament, the Psalms, okay, are either Psalms of adoration or Psalms of penitence, roughly. So we have one of each. The New Testament is either the history of the church from Acts, so we have one story from there, and then there's the letters, so we have one letter story, and then we have the Gospels, you know, where there's kind of archetypally 7 types of gospel stories: the calling stories, the miracles, the healings, etc. Okay, so that's kind of how we organize this section of the book, so that you understand. But so I'm here now in the first reading, and of course we're going right to the first covenant and its demise, if you will. You couldn't miss this, the beginning of our problem. So this painting is at the Bernacchi Chapel in Florence. Now, most people have been to the Sistine Chapel, and I would just recommend, if you ever did get to Florence, go to the Bernacchi Chapel. It's the Sistine Chapel of Florence, and it's not nearly as crowded. You can only see it for 30 minutes, but you can keep buying tickets. So, you know, we would just keep like all day long there as I'm studying this Bernacchi Chapel. And as you look at the chapel, on the right is a painting of the creation of Adam and Eve, or the temptation in the garden by Masolino. And then his student, Masaccio. Masaccio is like 19 years old. Masolino gets called away to do another painting somewhere else. And Masaccio is left, you know, you got to take over. And the young kid is a genius. A lot of people haven't heard about him so much because he dies young from the plague. But he invents the Renaissance, actually, with this painting. And as you look at the Bernacchi, you can see completely the different approach. So in the Renaissance painters, what they're trying to do is they're trying to paint heaven on earth, sort of the Emmanuel moment. So they're trying to bring the story to us as if it's here in heaven. So technically, they do stuff that our historians love, like they start molding physically three-dimensional figures that have solidity. They have shadow. There's light, right? They cast shadow. And there's perfection, which is this temple here is the gates of the Garden of Eden. But forget all that. Like, this is spiritually the moment in which they realize what's just happened. And for me, I don't know, it feels like what happens after you commit a mortal sin, like you can can't you just, you can almost, if you're in the Bernacchi chapel, you can almost hear Eve howling in agony over, how did I do this? And Adam, with his hand in his head, thinking, what was I thinking? As Evelyn often says to me, Steve, what were you thinking? I don't know what I was thinking. Actually, that's the problem. So, this is the beginning. And that set of first readings kind of in some ways takes you through salvation history, but we're not going to do all that now. I want to go to, now we're in the second reading, and I skipped the Psalms for time purposes, but we're in the second reading now. And again, in the second readings, we have a story from the history of the church, Acts, actually a great painting by Caravaggio called The Conversion of St. Paul on the way to Damascus. And then we have this image, which I think is the solution to the first image. It's love. And the Baroque painters and the church wanted, in the Counter-Reformation period, wanted to help the clergy and the laity understand a kind of abstract concept, what love is. Not Greek eros type love, but what they say is agape love, right? Self-giving love. And how do you describe this in a painting? It's kind of an attitude. And someone came up with the idea of doing it as a mother. What could be more giving than a mother with 3 little babies? And so there's a lot of images of charity in museums. You can find them, because most of them aren't where they started, of a mother serenely handling 3 babies at once. And there's a whole story about that, etc. So, but then there's this image. This is by Van Dyck, who's painting during the Catholic Restoration in England in the 1640s, 1660s. And this woman is actually trying to love, but she's kind of at her wit's end. Like, she's like the rest of us, because this is not easy to do. And the one baby's at her breast, and he's playing with her hair. The other kid is very rambunctious. And then one's playing hide and seek, and she's sort of at her wit's end. And she's trying to love. And it took my third visit to this to see the point of this painting, which is her look. Can you see what she's doing? She's looking up to God to figure this out. And actually, isn't this what it's all about, really? If you think about it, people say, why did he give me this cross to carry? Why have I got these 3 kids? Or why am I sick? Or why he doesn't love me, and oh Lord, take this away from me. Can you see what these crosses are for? His problem, God's problem, is that we lost pure love in the Garden of Eden. And in order to stand in his presence, we need to be restored to that state. So we have to kind of figure out how to do that. And these opportunities to love help us develop the habit of love in our soul to eventually become great lovers. And the only way to do it, I mean, there's two ways to do it. One is what I call the white knuckle method. This is my preferred method. You know, I'm tough, I can persevere, I get through this. The only problem is with the white knuckle method is like, you don't love anybody by the time you're done. You're kind of resentful, you know? So the humble way to do it is to say, Lord, help me to love. And that's what the young mother's doing. And as she looks up, the sky starts to open. And her eyes start to glisten with tears. I think tears of joy that he's helping her to love. They're practicing love. If you think I'm crazy, first of all, you consult a priest. But second is, read 1 Corinthians 13. The last two phrases, two verses of 1 Corinthians, a lot of people don't understand. Like, why? He's talking about love is patient, love is kind, love is all. He's going on these things. And then all of a sudden he goes, you know, when I was a child, I saw as a child. When I'm an adult, I'll see differently. Now through a veil, then now I see you only partly, then I will know you fully. So what Paul is referencing is this problem that once we get to heaven, we don't need faith. You're in the presence of God. We don't need hope. We've just resurrected. We only need love. That's why he's got that in that letter of love. So, okay, then we get to the gospel reading. And I see that we have this painting with us here at the Catholic Information Center. And this painting hangs in a small church called the French Chapel in just near the Piazza Navona in Rome. It's a place I go, every time I go to Rome, I go to see this. I can't help myself. You know, the Wall Street guy getting converted kind of thing. I mean, that's what this is, right? St. Matthew is having another dark day at the office, you know, working there, collecting money. He's got his money counters here with him. This is Matthew. These two young people, they think, are probably creditors. And, you know, he's just going about his business, making money. And it is a little dark. But other than that, he's feeling fine. And then suddenly, Jesus appears. And he looks out, and the light coming from Jesus extends across, shining right at Matthew. And Jesus is pointing at him, which, by the way, he's quoting Michelangelo's creation of Adam here. Do you see that? The hand? So everyone in Rome knows that that's what he's doing. So this is like the recreation, let's say the creation of Matthew. And Matthew's first reaction, instead, like Adam at least sort of reaches his hand up and tries. Matthew's like, not me, wrong number. You know, I'm not holy enough. You must mean him. Like, people aren't sure, is he saying you must mean him or it's not me? But either way, he's like trying to get off the hook. And I always tell people, you know, the Lord's calling all of us to be missionaries, actually. It's just that when he pings us, we hang up. Because we're like, that couldn't have been me. I mean, that was a mistake. You know, sometimes you just got to answer the phone. There's oh yeah, okay, you can see the hand there. Sorry, well, the hand of God there, yeah. Yeah, this one, I'm sorry, the gentleman in the front was mentioning, the one on the left is very famous. That's the creation of Adam by Michelangelo up on the Sistine ceiling, which, by the way, is in Visions. as well. So the next thing is develop good habits. And how many people have seen this painting? Okay, well, you all have to go to confession tonight because this painting is just down the street. It's at the National Gallery, and it's in a little, sorry? Oh, yeah, it's a government shutdown. Okay, you have absolution until it reopens. Anyway, this is by Harmonius Bosch, and this is a haunting painting, although it's very complicated. So let me try to take you through this. So what's going on here is this man is dying, right? You can see it's called the death of the miser, by the way. And we use this painting, by the way, at the moment of the beginning of the liturgy of the Eucharist, which is the offertory. Interesting time to do this, okay? So the miser is here, and he's on his deathbed. We know that because this is the angel of death who has just appeared and has got his arrow pointed right at the miser's heart. So the miser's on his last legs, let's say that. And even at this moment, and you can see devils are everywhere. Can you see them? The place is infested with devils. They're all over the place. So you're not getting a good feeling about this, but even at this last moment, an angel of the Lord has appeared and is telling the miser, look, it's not too late. Look up to Jesus. And the miser must be Catholic because he has a crucifix in his room. And she's pointing him to the crucifix. So I think one lesson here for us is that a lot of us think one way out of this could be just have a good time and then the deathbed confession kind of idea, which technically should work. But the problem is the habits we develop along the way fail us at that critical moment. So what's happening here is that you see this guy here? It took me the third visit to this painting to figure out who he is. He's depositing gold in the chest, and it's a devil that's in the chest receiving the gold. Okay, so it's the miser. So at this time in the 1500s, painters sometimes painted multiple time periods in the same painting. So this is actually a slightly younger version. And the miser even has a rosary hanging from his belt. So he's been doing this deal with the devil, presumably maybe a usurer or something like that. And he's depositing the gold. So he's kind of developed this habit of this gold thing. And unfortunately, the devil uses that at this critical moment, because even as the angel is trying to get his attention, the devil appears with what? A bag of gold. And the poor miser just habitually, even though, don't do it, he just can't help himself. He reaches for the gold, doesn't look up to the cross, and we're thinking this is not good. And that's when I realized who this person is. You see this little guy down here with the wings in black cloak? That's the soul of the miser. So that's a forward frame in time. That's the blackened soul of the miser heading off to the wrong place. We've got here, there you can see the devil here, and here's the deal with the devil. That's the miser. And then, there is the soul. And here you can see, there's the old man. You can see it's the same guy. So Don't be a miser. When the collection basket comes around, it's a chance to practice generosity so that your soul is generous when the deathbed confession. Okay. So then we go into the liturgy of the Eucharist, and there's a lot of imagery we use, but I wanted to use this painting here by Lorenzetti. Lorenzetti is a follower of Duccio, and he paints in the 1340s. So Duccio has invented for the first time the idea of trying to paint the inner thought of man. Like I call it the search to paint the soul of man, which maybe gets perfected in Rembrandt or even maybe after, but somewhere in there, right? So, and then Giotto, who also painted just ahead of Lorenzetti, is really into the Emmanuel moment, art, God coming to earth. So these two trends come together in Lorenzetti, who unfortunately dies when the plague hits Siena, and that's sort of the end of the Sienese, painting. But we have this wonderful little image. It's at the Met, and there's so much going on here. I just briefly talk about a few things. Like, first of all, this painting is about sacrifice, right? I mean, Jesus doesn't just allow himself to be crucified. He has himself crucified between two criminals. I mean, like, the sign over his head could have just been loser, right? I mean, this is like really an incredible sacrifice. And it's agapic. That's why Lorenzetti almost unnaturally paints the blood and water coming out of Jesus' side like a fire hydrant. Like, it's emphasizing he gave every last drop. And also the idea of forgiveness is in the painting. If you notice, can you see, I think it's pretty obvious, right? This is the bad thief. His body, they're both dead. His body's already corrupting, but the good thief who confessed, he's actually already resurrecting. In fact, he's got a halo, which means he's already in heaven with Jesus, who has a halo, right? So his body's bright. And then it's about, and I use it at the moment in the Mass for the prayer, Christ has died. I mean, we actually break down every prayer. So Christ has died, right after the words of institution. And Lorenzetti is reflecting on how we're reacting at this moment. And this is kind of a modern thought, right? So he's got sort of the hostile reaction, right? That's the husband who's been dragged to church by the wife. He's not really happy about being here right now. And, he's breaking bones, here, the guys with the clubs. And then I think the worst is the indifference. Can you see these two? These are two soldiers. They're talking about what they're having for dinner tonight. Like, Christ is dying on the cross here. And then there is the beginning of faith. So there's these two figures in the image. Do you see Longinus? He's, by tradition, the guard who was converted at the foot of the cross. And then probably this is Nicodemus. And do you see that they have a different halo than everybody else? Can you see that? It's hexagonal. So I had to research this. I figured out, what's this hexagonal halo? They use it at this time to depict people that by tradition they believe are in heaven, but the church has never declared a saint. The church declares saints not because they think someone's the holiest person in the world or whatever, that helps a lot, but you also have to have some sort of proof that you're in heaven, right? And so the church never went through that process with Longinus and Nicodemus. So that's why you have, I think, sort of the beginning of the journey. And then, of course, the all-in folks, John and Mary, they're fully participating in this moment. So the next time you go to Mass and you say Christ has died, you think about, where am I at this moment? Am I thinking about what's for breakfast after Mass, or where am I in the scene, Okay, well, this image here, no one has seen this image, I'm sure. I'll go back to this one. But we use this for the prayer during the words of institution called the holy and living sacrifice, where the priest says we offer we're in the liturgy of the Eucharist, and the priest is saying extra prayers after the words of institution. And we offer this holy and living sacrifice. So we wanted an image of that. And an artist who some of you know, a Catholic artist, some of them have struck up friendships with me over these books and things. But one guy is Donnie McManus, who's an amazing guy. And Donnie texted me when he heard we were in Florence. He goes, "Steve, you got to go see this painting." So we go over there. It's at the Church of Santa Felicita, sorry, which is just on the other side of the Arno. Okay, that's not really important, but it's a small little church. And Pontormo, who's painting in 1528, so the Renaissance, Rome is sacked in 1527, and pretty much the Renaissance ends right there. And the artists are trying to find a new way of expressing their art, and a school of mannerism is developing. Pontormo is really the beginner of that, right? So these images, El Greco is the most famous of this school. I think you can conjure up, you can see it here, these like psychedelic colors, which are not Renaissance-y at all. And the bodies have structure, but somehow or other, they're very spiritual, almost like he's painting souls, really, And everybody's floating in this painting. Now, what made the art historians crazy, and you'll see this book is heavily researched, partly because we like to see what the art historians are struggling with, because often that's an inspiration to us to figure out, well, in a spiritual context, maybe we could find the answer to their struggles. So as an example here, people have struggled for centuries over this void. So in a Renaissance painting, everything comes to the center, right? You think of the Pietà by Michelangelo. The eye is drawn to the center. Jesus and Mary are together at the center. So Pontormo, for the first time, and this would have been, at the time, scandalous. I mean, the guy writing about the time Vasari is like, can't believe he did this. He disrupts the center. Mary is falling back in grief. Jesus is dropping away from her. And the center has this void, like this mysterious void, like what's going on? And then Jesus is just like dropping. This, I think, is Joseph of Arimathea, and I think this is John. So he's actually, what's going on is Mary is releasing her son through an intercessor onto the back of John, the church. Now, where is he going? So if you look and go to the church, we have one fortunate thing here. This painting is still where it was painted for. No one goes there anymore, but it's still there. He's going to the altar. The painting is right above the altar. So the holy and living sacrifice, Jesus, is being deposited on the altar. And then when you kneel down, and this was another 3-visit idea before I finally clicked on this. And Evelyn and I are standing there saying a prayer, we're kneeling, and I look up and I said to her, "Sweetheart, that's what's in the void, the Eucharist." When the priest is standing there and holds up, "Behold the Lamb of God," and you're kneeling at the altar, the host, the Eucharist, is exactly in the plane of the void. So Pontormo's saying he fills the void left by his death with the Eucharist, which is here with us now, present. So this is also from Florence. There's a lot of Florentine paintings in my top 12 here. And most of you probably have seen an image of this in a Magnificat or something. This is probably the most famous image of the Annunciation ever painted by Fra Angelico, who was a monk. And he, for the first time, this is 1540 or so, is imagining the Annunciation happening right here in San Marco. Actually, if you go to San Marco, you'll see its cloisters just like this. So for the first time, he's sort of saying to the monks, and the monks, after their daily activities, they all live upstairs, and they have to go up a staircase. This painting is right at the head of the staircase. So this is the last thing they see as they go to their cells. Now, there's paintings in the cells, by the way, which are really interesting, and some of them appear in the book in a different place. But so I'm just giving you the context here so they can see, oh my goodness, this could have happened here. And in fact, it does happen here every time we receive the Eucharist. We use this painting for what I call the amen moment. And sometimes I could cry when I see, sometimes I do it myself, again, broken vessel, receive communion, and the priest says body of Christ, and people go, amen, or whatever, it's not like a big deal. And it's like a really big deal. And a lot of Catholics think, well, I'm kind of agreeing that this transubstantiation idea or something. It's bigger than that, right? This is the all-in moment. This is Mary's amen. And in this very still image, this tense scene, quiet, hardly any color except those multicolored wings of heaven on the angel, right? But and Mary is listening to this angel who's telling her, look, I know you thought you were going to get married and all that, but it's all off. You're going to be the mother of God. You could get stoned tomorrow, by the way, if Joseph doesn't listen to me. But, we're on your side here. And okay, the Romans are going to be after you. You got to escape across Egypt. It's a desert. There's robbers everywhere. This is not like easy peasy. And, if this was the missionary of Wall Street, he'd be like trying to negotiate a side contract or something, like a loophole, like, well, if this doesn't happen, can I have an out or something? And Mary, she just listens and says yes. So this is the attitude we want to have when we receive communion and we say amen. All right, I'm going to skip the Ghent altar piece because it'll take me an hour. It's so complicated. We have a chapter called Reflections After Communion. And here again, the broken vessel came up with this idea because, we receive communion and sometimes we're distracted or whatever. And I thought it'd be helpful to have 5 or 6, there might even be 7 images to reflect on. And sometimes I use a different one at every Mass, and I think you'll find something useful. Different ways to think about what just happened and to spend that precious time we have with Jesus right after communion. And one of the ones we've got in there is this image by Van Gogh. And I was very surprised by this image. It was painted by Van Gogh while he was a patient in Provence at the insane asylum. Evelyn and I went to visit it. There's a very quiet place, and he couldn't get outside at first. So his brother Theo would send him famous images, prints, and then he would use those to paint. And so he had this print. And Van Gogh was actually a very spiritual guy. He started out life as a Methodist minister, actually. But he had problem with relationships, and no one really says this, but I think he more or less got fired, actually. And his brother encouraged him to use art to try to find God. And so the last 10 years of his life, he's pursuing God through his art. That's my take on Van Gogh in a nutshell. But here, you see him painting this Pietà, and after a painting by Delacroix, and without going through the whole painting and everything, what's really interesting to me as I'm standing there looking at this painting, and I said to the guide, and the guide had an experience that he'll never have before. I was the only person on the tour, so I couldn't really help myself. I'm not sure who was giving the tour, actually, by the end of it. But we're looking at this together, and I said, John, that's a self-portrait. That's Van Gogh. So he actually painted himself as Jesus. And I don't think it's sacrilegious. I've talked to some priests, and Monsignor Landry, as you know, if you read the book, and was involved with the book, he's a co-author. And I think Van Gogh's reflecting on how when we, somehow or other, we let ourselves become Christ. So we can think of ourselves as consuming Christ in the Eucharist, or we can think that he's consuming us. This is another consuming us thing. This is, I think, a very famous image that you know of, St. Teresa in Ecstasy. It's a similar reflection, but again, for time, we close with this. And, Florence, Rome, there's a lot of paintings, Paris, London, but there are also paintings like this one. Like Evelyn would say, Steve, what are we doing here in Glasgow? I go, sweetie, we're coming to see one painting, okay? But we have to see this. And this is the painting. It's Dali's masterpiece. It's the Christ of St. John of the Cross. It's painted after a vision by St. John of the Cross, which is actually a sketch that St. John left. And then Dali had a dream about it and painted this painting. The average Catholic, I won't embarrass you by quizzing you, but I'll just tell you, the average Catholic makes the sign of the cross 8 times while attending Mass. A lot of Catholics make it more than that, but there are 8 particular times that we all do. And so one of the cool things about visions is there's a crucifixion image for all 8. And it's a kind of sub-arc of the book is the history, really, of the Eucharist image. The very first one is one of the very first Eucharist images. For several hundred years, Catholics, Christians didn't do crosses, crucifixes. It took them a while to work it out. Okay, I don't have time to talk about that, but this is the last of the 8. So as we leave the church, we always make one last sign. And we've just been through this incredible sacrifice of the Mass. We've heard the Word of God. We've been given our mission, and now we're being sent out back into the cold, if you will. And we make one last sign with the holy water, which is extra protection. And for that, we use this image. Now, this image is another one that made people crazy. And in fact, the curator of the Kelvin Grove bought this image by Salvador Dali for £2,000 in 1952. He was heavily criticized by the citizens of Glasgow for this idiotic purchase. This painting was extremely unpopular at first, and now it has become literally their treasure. I don't know how much I don't know that you can put a number on this painting. But one thing that really bothered people was that it has heaven painted as black. Like all the images we have of heaven, we have one, we have St. Michael and the Archangel in here somewhere. It's light. And, darkness is for hell. But Dali reverses that. This is God mourning, God the Father, mourning over the loss of his son, the death and sacrifice of his son, right? He's pouring the light of heaven out. So in the name of the Father. And then as we look at the cross, we see something that I'll just tell you was purposeful, because I've read read Dolly's letters about it. There's no nails holding Jesus to the cross. It's the one thing he left out of the St. John image. Because Dolly was trying to communicate to modern viewers that this was an act of self-sacrificing love. It wasn't, the act of a loser. He was holding himself to the cross out of love for us. He's showing us how to love so that we can follow him to heaven. So in the name of the Father, in the name of the Son. And then we notice that the cross is rising. It's actually not in the ground anymore. It's resurrecting. That's the Holy Spirit. He's bringing Jesus back to heaven and of the Holy Spirit. And then we look down and we see a shimmering lake. And I thought, since this is sort of a book signing, often authors will read from the book. So I thought maybe I'll do one little, and Evelyn's not here because she would tell me not to do this. But since she's not here, is this being taped? So, and of the Holy Spirit. As our eyes descend lower towards the earth, we can see the landscape below clearly, bathed in a bright light. This light must be the divine light of heaven, which God the Father has poured out to the very last photon onto the earth, not unlike the sacrifice of his Son's very last ounce of blood. Down there, in the bright, shimmering light that is poured out of heaven, we see an iridescent blue lake. There's an open boat in it. That boat must be for us, for you, and for me. It would seem to be the bark of Peter, the boat of the fishermen. The boat will need to fill the priest's last command to go forth on mission, to be fishers of men, and will be doing so with and through the Trinity. He's there in the scene, giving every ray of light he has to light our way. As he was walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and his brother Andrew, casting a net into the sea. They were fishermen. He said to them, "Come after me, and I will make you fishers of men." At once they left their nets and followed him. Amen. That's how Visions of the Divine ends. And that's how we'll end the talk. There are questions? Yes.
Phone over here, so let me give it to you so that the people at home can
because
hear
we're
it
on a video.
YouTube.
Yeah.
So we're coming at you, so raise your hand.
My name is Jack Maczynski. I'm living here in Vienna, Virginia. I'm a programmer, but my interest is how much time did it take you to write this book? It's a lot of work to be done. Probably a few years.
Yeah, it doesn't really make any sense that the chief investment officer of one of the largest investment companies in the world could be doing this. I can't explain it, actually. I think my answer is 50 years. In some ways, I've been processing this for 50 years, even when I didn't know it. That may seem like a trite or smart answer, I don't know. But a lot of these paintings that are in the book, I have visited with Evelyn or by myself over the last 50 years, many of them. Now, I would say around 3 years ago, we developed a conscious plan to do this. And Sophia was really after me to do it. The Pilgrimage Museum had been a big hit. And we could see it was helping people in a way that was different, you know. And then I got not assigned really, but I got asked to help out with our, we did a acquisition in London. So the Lord sort of provided this bi-continental deal, because a lot of visions does happen in the U.S. in terms of museum, but a lot in Europe. And, so weekends we could do this, and all our vacation time. I mean, Kat knows this, she's a next door neighbor. This summer I actually had a vacation, but I mean, for 3 years, there was no vacation. There was no nothing. But this is a joy to me, and it's been such a beautiful journey for Evelyn and I. Can you imagine going on a pilgrimage to 20 different cities? Then all the research, one of the things when I agreed to do it, Sophia said, look, because I said, I gave all the usual excuses, sort of the St. Matthew thing. I don't have the time. And one was, the amount of research, like I got 80 paintings. We got to go through every article written on all 80 paintings. I got all this theology. There's a lot going on here. And I thought, well, let me get, like, for the theology part, because, this is about the Mass. So, I don't want to, you could lead people into heresy if you're not careful here, right? So I engaged one of the top theologians on the Eucharist in the country, Monsignor Landry. And he agreed. I thought he would say no, He goes, Steve, I'd love to do it with you. So he is the theological voice, and he's very strict, which is really good for me. And then Sophia, they got me piles of articles. So as I got to every painting or sculpture, I already had all the research in front of me. And of course, I had to digest all that, but that's easy for me to do, And some of it I had already read, I knew about. It's not like I was fresh out of school on this stuff, but there was a lot of stuff to do. But and then the writing, once all that's done for me, I don't know, maybe giving you too much information. But when I had lunch with the President Sophia back in the spring of 24. And he kind of sweet-talked me into accelerating this process. It was like that, that movie Amadeus where the guy keeps looking for the symphony and like Charlie's going to say, like, where is it? I go, it's all up here, Charlie. He goes, well, we need to have it in a book form, So I said, I go, when do you need it by? He says, I need it by September 15th. Because he wanted to publish it before Holy Week. And I said, okay, I'll do it. So I came home and I told Evelyn. She goes, I said, I promised him we'll do it by September 15th. She goes, what year, Steve? I said, this year. He goes, that's impossible. Totally impossible. So I called up my assistant, Mary, who schedules my days. And I said, Mary, look, I need 80 3.5-hour blocks of time. It takes me about 3.5 hours to write a section, a reflection, which are usually about 3 to 5 pages. But it's all in my head. It's mostly just writing it out. So I need 3.5 hours. And so I said, just figure it out. So she goes back and, she's jiggling things around. It has to be a block of time. And she comes back. She cancels all weekends, all vacations, all Friday afternoon golf outings, everything. And she goes, I can't do it. I can only come up with 60. So I said, okay, let me try something. It was a Monday. And this is something that I thought, I'm telling you too much, but this is sort of interesting. It was a Monday, and Mondays in my business are very difficult. It's the long weekend, a lot of news flow, a lot of stuff going on. It's exhausting. And I said, let me try writing the first reflection at 4:00 today. She says, you can't do that. You're wasted on the afternoons. I know that. I don't schedule stuff too late for you. I go, let me just try. So I started writing at 4, and by 7:15, I had this beautiful, I was crying over it. And I don't know. I don't know how the Lord gave me the strength to do that, but Mary then grabbed 2 4-hour, 3.5-hour slots after work on weekdays, and that got us to the 80, and then we just clicked through. So I don't know. That's a window into how it happened. And the other thing is that Sophia did was all the art, like Sophia Press. They're the number one Catholic publisher, but one of the other deals they agreed to, which I thought they would say no to so I could get out of doing this, but I said, well, you're going to have to get rights to all these images. That's going to take forever. I don't have the time to deal with all these institutions and everything else. Oh, Steve, we'll take care of that. They did. And then I came up with one last thing. I said, well, the reason you can't do it is because one of the things I want to do is I want to do a chapter on the Creed that takes us through every prayer inside the Nicene Creed and shows how on one church it was all there. And the church I want to use is Orvieto Cathedral, and you can't possibly get me the images. We'll do it, Steve. And he did. Charlie McKinney, the president of Sophia, God bless him. So you'll see there's a section in Visions. It's part of the response to the word. So the 3 types of responses: the homily, the creed, and the prayer of the faithful. So there's a section on the creed that has images from the Orvieto of every prayer in the creed. It's spectacular. It's really nice. Okay, wait. Now no one's going to answer any more questions because.
Thank you very much, Steve. This is a real privilege to be here. I'm a sculptor, and so to listen to a lay Catholic and a lay artist talk about art is really fascinating and very insightful. One of the responsibilities of the church in America is to create sacred art here. And a lot of the art that we've seen is 1350s to the Renaissance to Counter-Reformation, and then we jumped to 1951 to Dali. But what are your thoughts on sacred art in America heading forward into the future? You think of, Roman culture as Greek 2.0, and you think of the American church as the European church 2.0.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on modern American sacred art?
I love that question, and because I'm very optimistic, actually. And actually, the most modern image in Visions isn't Dali, but it's an image by an artist who's alive today and actually relatively young, Donnie McManus. And we go out into the outskirts of Rome one Sunday morning to find this image. And I could write a book about the writing of this book and the obstacles it took us to find Donnie's Pentecost of the church, which we use in Visions. And I think there's artists like him. I don't know your work, but I'm guessing just from your question that it's probably pretty powerful. St. Patrick's Cathedral, have you been there? The narthex there?
I've seen the movie, TV.
Yeah, and I was actually involved in that project with Cardinal Dolan, and it's beautiful, and it's a vision of Saint Mary of Knock, the Virgin of Knock, but it's very modern and I think really uplifting. And isn't it encouraging that so many young people are now coming back to the faith? And I think that with art, I always say this to the missionaries, this is not that scary. we go out onto the streets in New York. It feels like it is because these people are all, in a different place. But I can assure you from years of talking, we've talked to 3 million people now on the streets of New York. These folks aren't having a good time. They're actually lost. And God doesn't lose. So I don't, we're just cogs in the machine, and we don't know how the thing's going to end, and it may take more than our lifetimes. But I'm really encouraged by the young people coming back to the faith and the artists that are starting to follow that and one thing you get about, especially you see this more in my earlier book, Pilgrimage to Museum, the intersection of culture, religion, art, and the faith. I mean, it kind of, you probably know that, right? It intertwines. And so I'd love to talk to you more. And I mean, keep up what you're doing because I think it's really important. I think you're part of a new movement that's going to be very powerful. Art has lost its way completely. You should read Pilgrimage and tell me what you think. But you can see it, how once the artists kill God and decide they're going to be God. Well, before you know it, we're just running ourselves into trees, and the stuff falls apart, and Steve Cohen becomes God. I only mentioned Steve because I'm not knocking Steve or anything, but just that. It's what people pay for something makes what it's worth, but it doesn't lift up to the transcendent anymore. And that's just really empty. And that's not what Catholic artists do. Yes.
Okay, one more question, and then we'll start the book signing.
Steve, thank you very much. Always enjoy listening to this presentation. I get something more out of it every time. But I was wondering, have you ever thought about doing a study or a book on the history of the church, maybe starting with the Acts and all of the extraordinary events that have happened in the church and looking at those through the prism of art?
Yeah, that's a fantastic idea. We have several that we're working on. The next one I think is going to be a pilgrimage to Spain, actually. We're still working on that kind of processing, but I love that idea, Tom. I think that's, I'm going to play around with that in my head. I didn't do the last slide, but probably can't now. Oh yeah, maybe I can. So your mission. So, understand that the CIO of Federate Hermes isn't writing books to make money. Okay, so actually all of our royalties always go to a Catholic charity. In the case of Visions, all the royalties for Visions are going to the Pontifical Mission Society, which funds the Pope's mission activities around the world. So this is an evangelical project. We're trying to help. I think the book will help a lot of Catholics and even fallen away Catholics and maybe even non-Catholics enter more deeply into the mystery of the faith. So please join the mission, be evangelists, give the book to your friends, get the word out on Visions. And watch the EWTN miniseries. You may have seen the one they did on Pilgrimage to the Museum. It's on EWTN Plus, and they've done a 5-part miniseries on Visions. It isn't out yet. It's still in editing, but it's coming this fall. So keep an eye out for that on EWTN Plus. And
Okay,
Angelica, I'll let you take over.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Steve Auth, for this incredible presentation. And if you'd like to buy early and often, you can do so just outside. Steve will be seated at the desk, and Kevin will take any purchases you want to make. But thank you so much for today, and we'll have to stream the EWTN miniseries here then when it comes out.
Yeah.